Yeah. Okay. So welcome all, and thank you for joining us for this panel. We're going to focus on digital health startup slash pharma slash corporate collaboration. And without saying COVID too many times, we'll also try to cover how did COVID impact, or I want to say accelerate, such a partnership. We've seen Merck and Pfizer and J&J and Bayer and Novartis, all of those already publicly established such collaborations and partnerships with startups, and so there must be a good reason for that. We have with us the founders of 4 of my favorite digital health startups in Israel. We have Omer Dror, he's the CEO of Lynx.MD. Avi Veidman, the CEO of Nucleai. Ittai Dayan, the CEO of Rhino Health, and Ravit Netzer and Goldenzweig. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Co-founders of LeadDesign. You all of you on the screen, and I've checked this, have the word partnership, collaboration, working with in your on your website or your pitch deck. So I figure you're all the right people to talk about those things. I want to give you 1 minute, and I'm counting, to talk about your company, and then we can move to the interesting things. So Ittai, you want to start?
Sure. Rhino Health developed a platform that provides seamless access to train and deploy AI on distributed, rapidly refreshing real-world data that is fed by a diverse group of real-world patients. We do this using a technology called federated learning that allows our customers, either medical researchers or healthcare AI developers, institutes, etc., not to move data at all, not to transfer ownership or to create any risks for the patient data privacy. And so the data actually stays at rest where it is behind the institution's firewall. Ultimately, our goal is to accelerate creation, validation, and improvement of AI. The only way you can do that is by using diverse data to create robust models that will be able to function in the real world. We're currently working with big tech companies like NVIDIA, as well as leading medical centers worldwide on solving real-world problems in AI development and pushing the boundaries of AI use cases through federated learning.
And we'll talk about sorry?
I'm not sure if I got the 60-second part, but
55 seconds.
Very good.
Perfect. And we'll talk about those collaborations in a little bit. Avi, tell us a little bit about Nucleai.
Sure, Renana. So Nucleai is a precision medicine platform company powered by AI pathology. We use computer vision and machine learning technology to predict the patient's response to oncological drugs. The platform could be used from translational research in pharma companies to global commercialization at clinics and labs. We are focused at the moment on supporting pharma companies in their research that will evolve into a companion diagnostics. That means that every patient will need to take the Nucleai test before the drug is prescribed. Before establishing Nucleai, I've served in the Israeli intelligence forces for 20 years as an head of an AI big data department, tackling complex problems in the domain of computer vision and automatic image analysis of satellite images. Happy to participate in this distinguished panel, Renana.
Thank you for being with us. Adi, Ravit, tell us a little bit about LeadDesign.
Sure, thank you, Renana. So first, we'll be fair and say that we're not a company yet, we're soon to be a company. Ravit and I both completed our PhDs at the Weizmann Institute of Science, where we developed computational tools for designing proteins, which basically means, in other words, that we design biological molecules on the computer for living. And to give you a sense of the state of the art today in the industry, so in the pharma industry or in green tech, ag tech, food tech, when you want to use proteins, you discover them in nature, so natural compounds, and then you try to optimize them and their properties by doing very long and hard processes in the lab that are sort of stochastic. And we want to revolutionize this field, the way these things are being done, and developed computational rational tools that will stop the need to rely on nature's random processes. And maybe we already, as still at the Weizmann, we already established one collaboration with Pharma that you will probably talk about later. Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thanks, Adi. Omer, last but not least, Lynx.MD.
So first of all, thank you, and thanks for Renana for hosting this and everybody that's listening in. I'm Omer, I'm the CEO of Lynx.MD, and Lynx is a healthcare data sharing platform. We help healthcare providers share their data with industry partners and academia. The story is that a lot of data is collected inside healthcare institutions. It's fragmented inside each institution and fragmented across multiple institutions. And about 80% of that data is unstructured, meaning images and notes, genomics data, data for medical devices. All of this data is super valuable for developing new types of diagnostic tools and new types of therapeutics. At Lynx.MD, what we do is help healthcare organizations that collect all of this data, share it with outside developers, basically helping them democratize the access to data, and bringing the new age of data-driven decision-making to healthcare. Personally, Lynx is the second company that I'm founding. The first was around natural language processing and machine learning, and was acquired a few years ago. And before that, I spent years in Israeli intelligence, also working in cybersecurity and the data space.
Thank you, Omer. We're very good on time. I'm very proud of all of you. Let's move to the interest. I mean, that was very interesting. Let's move to why we're here. So, I mean, it's easy to see, right, why corporate partnerships with startups make sense, right? Startups can benefit from corporate funding, from the resources, from the customer access, and corporates need the innovation, the agility, to stay ahead of competition. That's all very clear. And we've also seen in the past decade a really significant increase in CVC investments, right? And the amount of corporate venture arms, I think I read somewhere that about 3/4 or something around that number of the top Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 companies have an active venture arm. And also, I mean, it's clear that the growth of, I think it's clear, the growth of digitization over the past year has driven the need to innovate and, you know, kind of put the spotlight on those partnerships even more. So what I want to hear from you guys is if you could share, each from your own perspective, what's your best lesson learned from such partnerships? I mean, you've all had to establish, or in different stages of establishing significant partnerships with corporates, with pharma. What will make it more successful? What will derail it? What's the best time to even approach a large company? And let's start with you, Avi.
Sure. So I think it's like a matter of tension that you need to manage between reward and flexibility, or freedom to operate. In our case, in Nucleai case, our A round was led by Investor, which is a corporate VC that's a Swiss-based pharma company named Biotech. And as a company, I mean, Nucleai really provides its platform to other pharma companies. It was a real dilemma for us. We knew that this relationship with Biotech could really contribute to Nucleai a lot with their knowledge in drug research and development. But we have asked ourselves whether it will prevent us working with other pharma companies. So in our case, as we thought there was a great match, because Biotech isn't like a big pharma company, so it was like the best of two worlds. I mean, it was a strategic partner that had the domain knowledge and the right network, but it was not a direct threat to big pharmas. And in some way, it was contrary to that, because Biotech really sells their assets to big pharma for productization and commercialization. So at that time, we thought it was like a good fit. But this is a very specific case, and every case is, you need to assess it, whether you want to have the gain and the reward, or to lose some kind of flexibility along the time. That was our experience.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you're talking about an aspect that I didn't even think about when I thought about this question. You're talking about the collaboration in investment, which is super interesting. And Omer, what do you have to say about those collaborations? Not necessarily from the investor side, but even from the side of your customers, your design partners.
So I think these collaborations can be crucial to the success of the company. And I can talk about several different partnerships that we've formed. I think it's very important when you go after healthcare organizations, and a lot of startups in Israel, you talk to everybody that's willing to talk to you, and you partner with whoever is willing to partner with you. And most of the time that goes through the innovation arm of that healthcare institution. That has advantages, and it also has risks involved. And it's very important when approaching these organizations that you make sure that you're talking to the right person, and that the person that you're talking to has both the will and the ability to solve the problems that you think need to be solved, and that strategically align with the product that you're developing as a startup company. And in many cases, it would be very easy to show early successes. We're talking to all of these logos, and all of them say, yes, we're interested. But yes, we're interested in American English actually means come and talk to us next year. You need to be able to actually see actual steps and that the organization is taking to help with this partnerships. Usually it means that you need to be able to provide them with the right materials to sell this thing inside the organization. And you're going to get a lot of feedback if they do. If they're not answering your emails or taking the time answering the emails, even if they said yes, probably better to talk to another institution.
I think that's super valuable input, because like you said, it's very easy to get to talk to those guys. I think you guys know better than me, but the level of commitment of the other side is super important. And there are so many hoops that startups need to jump through when they're partnering with a corporate, right? The management approval, the risk acceptance, the buy-in of IT. And there's also a considerable amount of change that could be required in the day-to-day of how they work in the corporate. So in order for this partnership to scale or to prevail long term, then there's a certain level of commitment that you want to make sure that you feel from relatively early. Adi, Ravit, what do you have to say? I know you're very early in your discussions with in the partnerships that you're establishing. But
yes, so over the last year, we started thinking, we're developing methods for computational protein design that can be applied to drug design and to other molecular design aspects. But we're sitting in the academy at the Weizmann Institute and developing our favorite molecules, but we're not really sure whether those molecules have real needs out there. And we realized that in order to see that our technology really makes sense and is really important and can do the difference in the real world, we really need to partner with the large players in the pharmaceutical industry and in other industries and see whether and what are the real needs. So what we did in the last year is to partner with a large pharmaceutical company and to really partner with them on the process of drug development and see what are the real challenges and where are the aspects that we can help. And we partnered on a core technology of our research group. And I think it's still very early to summarize, but I think that for us, the early, if you're asking about the timing, the early is the better, because this is the real validation on the needs of the technology. And only by talking to the people that are actually doing the drug development process in those big corporates, we can really learn what are the gaps that they have in these processes, and where can we fit in. And also something that might be very trivial to everyone that has already signed those deals, but for us was very new, is the time that it takes from the moment that you start talking to them to the actual moment that you can actually start the work, because signing those agreements take months and involve a lot of exchanges between lawyers and contracts. And we're used to just thinking of a project and start working immediately, but this is not how it works with those companies, and you really need to plan ahead. And if you want to have a project running on a certain date, you really need to start thinking about it half a year before that, and actually draw the details in order for you to start the work on time. But I think it's really a great advantage for us to do those collaborations.
I'm smiling because I see Avi nodding and I see Ittai nodding, and Omer, I'm sure, is nodding in his part. Ittai, what is your experience with those collaborations? So
even before Rhino, I was running the Mass General Brigham AI development operations, which was a 60 FTE group working with companies like GE, Nuance, NVIDIA, and others. So the academia industry partnership world is very close to me. I'd say that as a startup CEO, the differences I can see is that you have to ensure there's true strategic alignment, that you're solving a business need that is real for both companies. And in that sense, you make sure that your partner also has skin in the game. If you're the small guy here, the little guy, failure isn't an option, and you'll always find a way and some sort of motivation in order to get the job done. But you'd want to avoid a situation that you solve a short-term problem that isn't a real strategic issue for the company. And the only way you can prove that your business model will scale and will be transferable to other customers is if you're really doing something that has a real horizon to it. The last thing you want is to have your partnership end as one of those skunkwork projects that dies a quiet death in a big organization. In terms of when you want to approach, I think I was smiling when Ravit, talked about it, because I think it's kind of a big academia to industry transition question. And in reality, big corporates have a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of legal considerations and risk mitigation, etc. So I would say you need to approach people very early and start the conversation, the relationship, and mainly listen to people, not pitch. Because sometimes you can convince one person, but you won't convince his boss or his other colleagues. And the second thing is in terms of when to actually scope and sign a partnership, I'd say the best thing is when you have a prototypical product, even better a proof of concept, even better a first customer, because then you'll actually have the right leverage and the right place in the spotlight in a large organization.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, okay. Let's stay with you, Mr. Rhino. Let's talk about, you talked about yet another type of collaboration, which I love. Now, let's talk about another one. And I said we won't say COVID too many times, but how did COVID change the way that hospitals and providers and health systems work together to improve the standard of care? And if on COVID, then coming out of the pandemic, then what can we learn about this type of multi-site collaboration and maybe take forward to accelerate meaningful solutions?
Yeah, so COVID has been a very big catalyzing event. So I think it makes sense that we go back to it. It's been fairly recent. I think what it showed that systems, networks, payers, providers, and many stakeholders had an urgent issue to collaborate on, and they had true incentive to do that. And by doing that, kind of break walls that were stopping collaboration in the past. Last fall, I co-led the exam study that included 20 hospitals worldwide to create and improve an AI algorithm in order to prognosticate COVID patients, basically help hospitals allocate patients to the right site of care and to evaluate their emerging resource requirements. A situation that we see today with India, for example. The results were remarkable, not just because the algorithm performed well, and to be honest, I think that an AI algorithm that has a lot of diverse data and a big quantity of data will typically perform better. It was how easy it was to get people onboarded. And the way it was, the approach we took is a federated approach, meaning you guys keep the data at site, we'll run any computation tasks on the edge, and you guys will retain the full control over your data. And I think collaborations of this type, when you agree on a very descriptive use case and scope, so you know that your data is used for the right purposes that you agree to, while you retain the control over the data, so that mitigates both risk as well as prevents the risk of value leaks, in which people take your data and use it for other purposes and you don't know about it. I think this will continue. I can see that there's also other vectors of movement regarding centralizing data, health information exchange, and other things like that sponsored by the NIH. I see these eventually as rather complementary than contradicting, in the sense that sometimes it makes sense to centralize data. To a large sense, we believe it doesn't. But even if you have a centralized data repository, you'll always have a need to continue federating. If you want to go into new markets, new situations, get more refreshed real-world data, or get richer endpoints that don't always, hospitals want to typically allow them to leave a hospital's firewall, like patient outcome and like more personal identifiers. So I think both of these will continue to enrich the data ecosystem and encourage additional innovation in the digital health.
That's very interesting, because I think that's one of the questions that are still, it remains to be seen, right? With COVID, the world was united around a global catastrophe. And so I assume a lot of barriers, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of the hoops that we talked about or that I mentioned before were probably disregarded. And I guess we'll have to see how that appetite will look like when the world, returns to normal, whatever normal looks like.
You can see it as a one-time event or a catalyst. I choose to see it as a catalyst. I think it's something that will ignite change. We still have the impetus of providing the right technology in order to maintain and sustain this change in a safe way.
Yeah, I fully agree. I also choose to see it as a catalyst, but that's exactly what I'm saying. We'll have to see how those partnerships, I'm calling it partnerships, but it's so much more than that. How will they look like the day after? Avi, you are using computer vision and machine learning to predict the progress of cancerous tumors, right? And patients' immune system response to determine what's the most effective or efficient course of treatment. So clearly you have, the first collaborations that come to mind are with the provider, the pathologist, but your vision is much broader than that, right? You mentioned Debuform before. You were talking about collaborations with Pharma, with Biotech companies. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the difference between those types of collaborations from the experience that you've had so far? Maybe from even the aspects that Ravit mentioned before. How long does it take? How do you identify the right stakeholder?
Sure. So I'll refer to, I would say, a much broader aspect of your question, Renana, that I think that many AI companies comes in mind, where you could essentially, with the technology of AI and machine learning, you could apply it to the physician or the clinic, or you could apply it to the pharma company and the research. So those are very interesting and quite different aspects of things. You could see that in the domain that we are handling, which is pathology. You could see that in radiology as well, and in others. So on that sense, it's a great question that we had, like, to make the choice in the early days of the company. Are we approaching pharma or physicians? We've noticed that if we aim to sell to physicians, we will need to help them streamline and automate their current flow. In a sense, it's like digitizing their old pathology books that they've used in the last 100 years.
And I'm sure it's very easy to make doctors do that, right? I mean, to change their workflow.
Of course, it has like a lot of friction that you need to overcome. And there is a lot of value that you need to bring to them in order to do so. So we thought that there is much more potential nowadays in the convergence of AI, machine learning, and the huge amount of data that exists. This is a kind of like a perfect storm that could evolve to a novel discoveries and novel biomarkers that essentially will be writing the new book of pathology and precision medicine. So we took the road of focusing on pharma first, as we thought that it's an high risk but high reward path with much less resistance in adoption that we believed will be in the pathology diagnostic labs at the moment. But we're progressing. I mean, we start and very focused right now on pharma, but we plan to deploy our technology in the pathology labs later after being approved as part of the drug development process. So this is kind of a strategy that we've decided to take in, which each one of those physicians or pharma has their different life cycle. It's a different entity that when you're working with physicians, you need to go over to 5,000 pathology labs in all over the US, for example. While you're working with pharma, you need to approach the leading 20, 30 pharma companies. So it has like different characteristics and a different go-to-market. And that was the path that we've decided to take it.
Yeah, and I think it's very relevant for startups to listen to what you just said, because the appetite, I guess, of the physicians versus the biotech, the pharma companies to adopt solutions or tech solutions, I mean, it's probably very different. And a lot of times when entrepreneurs ask investors, when we talk about markets, then we say that it's not necessarily the largest market that is interesting. It's also the one that is more open to disruption, open to adopt the technology. It's something that, it's very easy to overlook that. But
Right. And don't get me wrong, working with pharma, it's not like a ride in the park. It has its own limitation. Ravit and Adi talked about like the pharma time. The pharma life cycle is quite long. It could be like birth 9 months or so, or more than that. But it has its own advantages for us, and that was the reason we've decided to go through that path.
Yeah. Omer, your job is even more difficult because you have two sides of collaborations, right? Two sides of pipeline, because you need, on one hand, the partnerships uploading the data to your platform, and then you need, on the other hand, your customers, which are, they're typically not individuals, so that's a whole other pipeline to work on and develop, and you need them synced, right? Because you need the input and you need the guys using the data. And so I wanted to ask, how did you approach that double-sided partnership requirement? And also that adds a lot of complexity to each pilot, right? Because you can't onboard customers without enough data. You can't convince the data providers to come without showing them that there's the other side as well. So how did you approach pilots in that regard? Is also something that I'd be happy if you could talk about.
Yeah, so I think when we started Lynx, the first thing we did was to do a detailed analysis of the journey for our customers. And when we started this, we looked at our customers as all of the companies that are looking to access the data, okay? Whether it's pharmaceutical companies, medtech companies, medical device companies, anybody that wants to access data. And the way I see it, in this space, anybody that wants to do anything with medical data and innovate the healthcare space should be able to do it. But when you start analyzing the process, you realize that it's really, really long, really tedious, and takes a lot of patience and a lot of work from the people wanting to access the data. And B, all of the control is in the hands of the healthcare providers. Okay, so these large institutions that move really, really slowly and takes a really long time to partner with. And what we did, understanding that, is really looking at what incentivizes healthcare institutions to share their data. When do they do it? How do they do it? And you realize, like Ittai said earlier, that this happens on a very narrow basis. Every time a healthcare institution shares data, it's for a specific purpose, and they have to repeat this process of aggregating the data from the multiple sources, cleaning it, and giving access to that specific use case. And understanding that, what we did was starting to approach the healthcare provider institutions. And finding the right people inside these institutions is key to actually getting fast adoption. Okay, and it turns out healthcare institutions really want to share their data. They want to be the best in their fields. They want to be innovators. They want to partner with all of these startup companies and developers and AI companies. But it's very painful for them to do. And it's painful because of the security and privacy aspects of this collaboration. So the way we approach the two-sided marketplace is really understanding where the friction lies and then tackling that friction. And what we do is we approach the people inside the healthcare institutions that want to share data. These are the clinical champions and the research the top researchers that are really having the problems with their own organization making the data accessible to outside partners. And that, I think, was the key to us creating really fast adoption and being able to get to where we are at this short period of time.
You're saying all you need to do is align interests. That sounds easy.
Yeah, it's a difficult task. It takes a lot of commitment and a lot of asking questions and understanding people's incentives.
Yeah.
You need patience in healthcare.
Patience in healthcare. We call the panel that, right? Patience in healthcare. Adi, Ravit, Avi mentioned Debut Farm, but I just read something that the Debut Farm CEO, I just read an interview with him, and it was published, I think, a couple of weeks ago. He talked about how collaborative efforts can lead to the development of innovative therapies that target unmet patient needs, and he said that in the attempt to overcome challenges and reduce the complexity or the risks that are associated with drug development, then startups and pharmaceutical companies have become increasingly more open to the idea of collaborating. So it's nice that everyone in the game wants to play, but from your experience, when you're looking at something as fundamental to the process of or to the business of the pharma company, you're trying to be involved in the design of the drug itself, right? It's an early core process, right? In the high-risk process of the pharma company. What is the sentiment that you get about their willingness to outsource? I asked that in a very messy manner, but what is the sentiment that you get about the willingness to outsource such a core area of activity into a startup? And are there other aspects of the process that you've seen being outsourced? What do you think would never be outsourced and would always be developed internally?
Yeah, so I'll start maybe from the bottom line is that is from our
bottom line is yes.
what we read and what we experience ourselves is that the companies are very keen to, I'm not sure if outsourcing would be the word, because it's sort of a partnership, typically a long-term joint venture where a lot of the risk is exactly as Debbie's Farm CEO described it. A lot of the risk is on the company, the startup or the small company that collaborates with the big pharma. I think that what pharma realized maybe is that, right, so developing a drug is a very long and complex process. A lot of details, a lot of risk. Some of them is all the clinical phases, where being big is a huge advantage. Nobody can do it instead of these companies. And probably if you did one phase 3 experiment, you are now very good at it, and you're likely to know how to do the next one. But then in the earlier step, there is today specifically a lot of room for innovation, specifically because it's the digitization. What a hard word to say. It's right. So it's the digitization sort of era. People expect it to come, and I think that the pharma companies are keen to collaborate if they feel that there is some kind of technology that can solve a problem for which they can't use their own in-house teams. Or some other thing. And this is what we felt ourselves. So when we tried to convince this pharma company to collaborate with us, they wanted at first, but it was this American language that Omer, I think, mentioned that we weren't sure about. And then we started running like possible targets. And then when they found a target that matches the main advantage that we offer, then continuing from there was very easy. And of course, I think another good thing that we see in the pharma, and by the way, it doesn't exist in other fields that we want to address, because we want to address also fields in chemical, the chemical industry, green tech, food tech, and this kind of stuff, is that the pharma industry, because of the risk and the complexity, they have these models that you pay them a small upfront payment, but then you have these milestones and even royalties payment coming later, so you can mitigate the risk to. If the startup wasn't successful, so you don't pay most of the money. You don't have it in other processes, and indeed there it's much harder to find a good model for you to do a core thing for the other company. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't touch at all how do you monetize the partnership, but that's for the next panel. Okay, because that's also interesting. There are different ways to monetize, and not all work with pharma, with biotech, with corporates. We don't have a lot of time, but unfortunately, but I would like each of you to stay and really have a minute. Coming out of 2021, do you think we're coming out stronger in terms of external partnerships? And Ittai, I think you referred to it, so we know what you think, but you're gonna say it again anyway. But are we coming out stronger in terms of those partnerships? Has the digitization storm that COVID inflicted, did it help? Did it make things more complicated, slower, faster? Avi, what do you think?
So I'll refer to, first of all, the global aspect, and then maybe I will take the Israeli angle. So from the global aspect, COVID was a global phenomenon. And in order to solve a global phenomenon, you need to have partnerships and in the global sense, right? So maybe practically it will not be manifest itself in the tactical form, but that was the same as like climate change. You could solve it only if you are doing partnerships. So on that aspect, I think it really makes us, I would say, come stronger from that aspect. In the Israeli angle, I think that there were 2 points that are worth mentioning. First of all, partnerships with Israeli healthcare startups are very evident after the COVID. You've seen Pfizer doing their, I would say, work in Israel, understanding that there is a unique aspect of working with the Israeli very centralized healthcare system that could provide real world data that will allow doing some research. So on that aspect, I think it brings the collaboration of Israeli startups in a much brighter light. This is one of our uniquenesses as Nucleai. We have partnerships with different providers of data that comes from Israel as well. So that's a very good opening point for partnerships. And another aspect was that everyone were in the Zoom. So I'm not a big fan of Zoom, but before COVID, I was about a week every month in Boston. So right now, I could go and do some Zoom meetings all around and creating some more partnerships, just going into virtual. So I don't like the Zoom. It's really flattened, I would say, the discussion, but it really flattened the world as well. So it gives us as a Israeli startup that are far away from the US scene, some kind of like an advantage. So I hope that in the next few months, we could really combine the Zoom advantage and going back, flying to Boston area. And maybe I could visit you, Ittai.
The advantage without the jet lag.
You're very welcome.
Omer, what do you think? You have 30 seconds.
I think COVID highlighted that data sharing and partnerships and collaboration is the only way to go. I think before that, people were very protective. And once COVID started, all of the privacy concerns and all of the technical difficulties really were thrown out the window, and everybody started sharing everything. Now, I think when COVID will stop, this will also trickle down and disappear maybe a little bit, but I think over the next 5 or 10 years, this is going to have a dramatic effect. Today, everybody understands the importance of data sharing, and I think that's a great opportunity.
Thanks. Ravit?
So I think also for us, it seems that everybody understood it. It was something that was debated for a long time. Once the new virus emerged, there was a real need to find a quick solution to it. So you can no longer rely on the very long drug development processes that take years and on finding only natural solutions. And I think that there is a deeper understanding today that you have to also combine computational tools and digital tools in order to accelerate the drug development process and find faster solutions, and also to be able to change faster together with the virus or together with the diseases. And in order to do that, I think that there are more and more computational tools that are allowing you to do that. And I think also the big corporates will adopt them more and more.
Yeah, and that are not necessarily being developed within the corporate.
Yeah, for sure.
Ittai, we'll finish with your final words of wisdom.
Well, as you know, I am bullish on collaborations and on leverage of healthcare data. I will throw a few words of caution on the flip side of that. First of all, a lot of the developments in this market might not be addressable by startups and tech players. Much of this is driven by governmental agencies, NIH, CDC, etc. And companies like, many of the panel members here may have to learn how to work in a different way than they know from the tech world. Second of all, I think that now we're at the point where there's already a lot of AI created, and the impetus is really on deploying and improving solutions continuously in the real world. And that may require a big technological upgrade that not all companies and not all institutes are still aware of how to solve. And so I'd say many new opportunities, also some of the old challenges, and probably some new challenges.
Thank you for that, Ittai. Unfortunately, we're way over time, but I had a great time, and I thought this was very interesting. So thank you all for the time and for the insight. You all should talk. And that's it for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renana.
Thank you.